Hello Infiniteers, and welcome back for a new episode of Toybox Tutorials. It has been a couple of weeks since my last tutorial, and I apologize for that. I have been very busy. I have been working on the upload schedule for the Disney Infinity Archive project for November, and on another big project that I will be announcing next week, so stay tuned for that. And of course I had to put together my Halloween video for yesterday. And on top of all of that, I've been trying to finish up my new patio and some other projects around the house before winter comes. So Toybox Tutorials had to take a back seat for a couple of weeks. But I am back now, and I should be able to resume my weekly schedule for this series and post a new one every Friday. Today I want to finish up the conveyor belt obstacle course and talk about a few of the toys that I will need to do that. These toys are all fairly basic, but there are some things that you can do with them that you may not be aware of, so I want to make sure I cover these toys in a tutorial for you. The first one we're going to look at is the laser tripwire, and we'll place one right here. And let me put down a button that we can also use to play with this. And looking at this toy, you may have played with it a little bit. It seems pretty basic. You walk through it, and the player trips. And if you notice his health bar in the upper left, he took a slight bit of damage, but not much. Mostly this is an inconvenience. It just causes the player to trip. And you might wonder, well, what's really the point of that? Well, let's take a look at it and see what we can do with it. So the first thing you'll notice is that there is a logic menu. If you look at the little pop-up menu in the lower right, and if we open that up, it does have a property, and that is team. And you might think, well, what's the point of putting that on a team? Well, let's take a look at that. Whenever you wonder about what a toy is or what it does or why something's there, it's always a good idea just to play around with it a little bit. So let's put it on a team and see what happens. Sometimes you'll discover something pretty new and exciting. Other times you might be left scratching your head going, why is this here? Which is kind of what we're going to see today. Alright, so we put this on a team, and the first thing you'll notice is there's no difference. You can't tell that it's on a team. If you put Mickey on the blue team, you still can't see a difference. But when you run through it, Mickey no longer trips. And that's good. You wouldn't expect a tripwire on the same team to do anything to the player if the player's on that team. But how you know which tripwire is on which team, you can't really tell. And so it's kind of silly to me to have a tripwire on a team and no way to tell if that's going to impact the player or not. And maybe that's kind of the point of it, is it's supposed to be a surprise. But then for the players on that team, how do they know that they can safely walk through it? So I don't really see much value in that. But there are some behaviors and trigger signals that we can use here, so let's look at those. So if we connect the button up to the tripwire, you'll notice you can connect it up, and you can turn it on or off. And that's pretty self-explanatory. So I hook that button up to turn it off, and if we do that, that removes the laser, and you can walk safely through there. And one of the things you might be able to do with that is you could connect a couple of time delayers to that to make an intermediate trap where this comes on for a second, goes off for a second, comes back on. So you have it go on and off and on and off, and the player has to time their way through it, which could be good if you put some kind of low-hanging block over this that makes it tough to run through. You'll also notice there are some logic connections here, so this will broadcast 3 trigger signals. When the player trips over it, it'll broadcast this one, and when the player turns it on or off, it'll broadcast one of those. So it's pretty basic, but let's see what we can do with it. Now the whole key to using a tripwire effectively is its placement. Where would it be bad if the player tripped? And the first one that comes to mind for me is right here. If the player trips over this, they're going to go right underneath that blade. And that would not be a good thing. So if we do that, now you'll notice Mickey didn't actually fall forward. That time he did. Sometimes he doesn't, and the conveyor belts make that a little bit tricky. So you might want to move this back a bit, but you don't necessarily need to. Most of the time that seems to work when you place that there. But if we place it, like for example down here, you will definitely see the behavior that we saw a moment ago, which is the player just goes up in the air. Well, now that time it made him actually fall forward. So you just never know. That time he just went straight up and down. So the tripping behavior is a little bit different on a conveyor belt. But that is a very simple use that you can do, is just place that there in front of a dangerous obstacle and make the player have to jump over it. Alright, let's play around with that a little bit more. So over here we're going to set up another obstacle. We're going to make this one really penalize the player. So we're going to put this fan here right past that tripwire. And by default, let's turn that off. So we'll come up here to our level starter. New logic connection on catalyze. Come over here and turn our fan off. And by the way, this fan does have a little bit of behavior. You can turn it on and off. So it doesn't have to stay on all the time when you place it. And it'll also broadcast when it's stopped and started and when a player enters it. So this fan has some nice behaviors with it too. And you'll notice also you can connect it to a path. So you could have this move back and forth if you want. So you may have thought that fan, you just place it in the environment and it just blows whatever walks in front of it, but you can do a little bit more with it than that. So we'll come back over here and push the button that invokes the level starter and simulates loading up the toy box so that now this fan is off. And let's connect this tripwire up so that when the player trips over this, we turn on the fan. So if the player jumps over this, they should be able to get safely past the fan and nothing would happen. If they do trip over it, that'll kick on the fan and it'll blow them off the conveyor belt, which would be bad. And then the player will end up respawning at some point prior to this, which I'll talk about in a moment. And so what we want to do is when the player does get blown off the conveyor belt here, I want to make sure we turn that fan back off. Otherwise the player will have no way to get past that. Alright, so new logic connection when entered by player any. So if they get blown off the conveyor, we'll go ahead and turn this back off. Alright, so let's see what happens. You'll notice it's not blowing. We jump over this, we can run past it safely. Alright, but if we don't... Whoa! And now that fan is off again. And you might think, well, okay, it's real easy for the player to jump over that. Well, let's make that a little bit more challenging. And we'll use another toy, which is this laser fence. And there's 3 different styles, as you see. We have this one, which we are going to place right above this, like that. So now we have this obstacle that's going back and forth over that, and if the player touches that, that's a bad thing. Okay. But you also have ones that can move up and down, and ones that move side to side this way. And so there's a lot of different possibilities of things you can do with this. So we could place one here. We could place another one back over here. And make a couple of obstacles for the player to go back and forth. And you might think, okay, that's a pretty simple obstacle. Well, you'll notice in the lower right, this has a logic menu also. So if you come in here, you can connect this to a path, so you can have it move around. So not only can that move back and forth, you could make it move up and down as well, or anything else you want to do with it. There's also a property, and that's active or inactive. So if I turn this off, you'll notice it stops moving, but the lasers are still there. So if the player touches this, they're still going to die. They don't get injured, they die. It's lethal. So all the active does is turn it on and off to stop the movement. It doesn't actually turn the lasers off. There's also some trigger signals. So if the player is killed by this, it'll broadcast that. And if the toy is turned on or off, either in a property or through a logic connection, then it'll broadcast those signals. And as you might expect, I'm not actually going to hook this up, but just so you can see, if we hook the trigger area up to this, and we look at the behaviors, it can be turned on and off. So we could connect that with a trigger area or a level starter to turn it on or off, or have something else turn it on. So for example, we could set this up so that it's off by default, like the fan, and have it set so when the player trips over it, that turns it on. If they trip over that tripwire, or if they go through a trigger area or step on something, that would do that. Okay, so there's some of the other toys that maybe do a little bit more than you thought. You can place them in the environment and just use them as is, but you can also do some other things with them. So that's kind of important. And now this becomes a much more challenging obstacle, because now we've got that thing up there. So we got to not only avoid the tripwire, we got to make sure we jump over it when it's not in the way, and we got to deal with this conveyor at the same time. So we got 3 different things we're dealing with to make that, to get past that. And then we got these things here in the way, which can be kind of interesting. And we can put some other things downstream here too. We can put the rotating spike in here and make that kind of challenging as well. Maybe put a couple of them down. And maybe want to rotate one of these so that they're off a little bit. So you can use these things in combination to do some pretty fun things. Okay, since we're right over here, there's something else I want to do back over there, but for right now, since we're right here, let's finish setting up the last little section of the conveyor here. And I'm going to need to put down a few blocks, so let me set my style here to our kiln style, which is what we're using for all the terrain. And I'm going to pick that up and put it back to get to the terrain drawer. Okay, we are going to build a little apparatus around this end of the conveyor. Like that. And put that in there, and then let's go ahead and put down a couple of pendulums. I'm going to pick this up, put it back to get to that part of the drawer. And we talked about pendulums back in episode 63, but I'm going to use them again here. We're going to place one right underneath here, and then I'll spin it around and we'll drop another one right over there. And I'm going to style these if I went the right way. I probably did not. There's a hazard texture that I think would look really good and make these really stand out. Probably would have been faster to go the other way. That usually happens. I picked the wrong direction. There we go. And I think that looks really good. Okay. So now we have a couple of pendulums swinging back and forth. And since I flipped it around, I think what'll happen is next time I load up the toy box, they'll be going in opposite directions. So now we have something else to avoid when we come around that corner, which is pretty easy, but still looks pretty cool. Okay, and that fan does look a little funny just sitting there, doesn't it? So one thing we could do is drop a block over here. Now you want to kind of be careful here. Because you don't want the player on the conveyor here to be able to jump over and skip this obstacle by doing a super jump and landing on top of this block. So I'm placing a couple of these up on top of there, just to make that kind of high. It would probably be a good idea. Put that down below there too. Okay, so it kind of looks like that fan's actually attached to something. And we can add some decoration and stuff to that later. Alright, the last thing I want to talk about is the lab elevator. And pick this up just to get back to that part of the drawer, and I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. Alright, so the lab elevator, this I believe is from the Spider-Man playset in 2.0. We're going to put this right back here in the corner, like that. And this is another one of those toys that seems kind of simple. You'll notice as soon as we put it down, it went down in the down state. And actually, I'm going to flip this around, just because I like the look of having the machinery underneath, the lifting machinery that way versus this way. Well, it doesn't really matter, I guess. But this is one of those toys, again, that seems pretty basic. So you put it down, you step on it, it lifts you up. Step on it again, it takes you down. And it seems pretty simple. But there's more to this toy too than meets the eye. You'll notice it has a logic menu. And so you can connect this to a path and have it move back and forth if you like. There's also a logic menu here So it'll broadcast trigger signals when it reaches the top and the bottom. So if you want to do something, whenever this elevator goes up to the top or comes back down to the bottom, you can connect this to other toys to do something with that. Now, it also has some behaviors, as you might expect. So I'll just temporarily use this to look at those. We won't actually hook this up. But you'll notice you can move it up or down with a logic connection. So we could use the level starter, for example, to connect it to move up. And so when the player enters the toy box, this will be in the up state up here. And so you don't have to use this with it in the default state of down. You can change that if you want in your toy box so that it's up by default. And maybe the player has to do something in order to lower that and be able to use it. So for example, if we come over again to our level starter, I wasn't going to do this, I was just going to tell you what you could do with it, but as I was thinking about it a moment ago, I thought, you know, this actually might not be a bad thing. So let's go ahead and put that in the up state. And once again, we'll come back over here and push the button to invoke the level starter, which should put that in the up state. It's always better, I think, to show you what a toy does versus just tell you. Okay, so now it's in the up state by default. And if you step on it, now it will come down. Alright. So when we come over here, it's going to be in that state. And I can't get it. I can't get to it. So we need to do something to pull it down. One of the things you could do, for example, is maybe set up a little shooting challenge for the player. And connect that so that when this trigger is hit, it moves it down. Now we come over here. Of course, Mickey's little, there you go, little thing is hard to aim there. You could always equip a blaster or something, but then that lowers it so then Mickey can get up on it. So that's something you can do with this besides just placing it in your environment. You can make it a little bit more interactive and more of a puzzle that the player has to solve to be able to use the elevator. And with that, that wraps up the conveyor belt obstacle course. Next time, we will begin working on the mini boss battle over on the next island, and I will cover a few more of the Marvel Battlegrounds toys that are going to help make that an epic battle. Until then, I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If so, please like and subscribe, and leave a comment to let me know. That's all for me today. Take care and have a great weekend.